Hey guys, so I'm going to attempt my first poi tutorial in a little while. I've gotten 2 requests in the past month for a tutorial on how to do plane shifting. The most recent request was a very, very special one that I felt I couldn't say no to. I'll explain to you guys at the end the nature of this request and let y'all decide if this video then deserves its place in the pantheon of the several plane shifting tutorial videos that are already out there. And yeah, so plane shifting, what is it? Well, fundamentally it's the idea of trying to move our poi in 3 dimensions rather than being stuck in just the same 2 dimensions, right? We normally, for all intents and purposes, stay in 2 dimensions when we're presenting ourselves to an audience. But plane shifting offers us the opportunity to present a view to an entire audience around us in a really kind of cool way. It's very similar to another type of movement, which I prefer to think of as plane bending, the easiest example of which is the figure 8 that we all play with when we first start spinning poi. Another example is this funky pattern that Arashi sometimes does. But by and large, the hallmark of this type of movement is that the poi head keeps moving the entire time, but has its path very, very subtly deformed to shift it into a different plane. Whereas with plane shifting, the poi head comes to a complete dead stop before you move it to another plane, which is usually about 90 degrees off. It could be another increment, but 90 degrees really seems to be nice and symmetrical in a way that people tend to find aesthetically pleasing, right? So, how do you get there? Well, there are some basic skills you need to have. The biggest one of which I'm going to say are flowers. Whether it be in-spin, which I'm not as big a fan of, but definitely there's some possibilities there, as much as there are with anti-spin, which I'm a lot bigger fan of. And specifically be able to do anti-spin in diamond configuration and be comfortable with having your pedals at each of the 4 compass points. Like, if you're whiffing on it at all, this is going to be kind of hard. By no means necessary, but also helpful. Polyrhythm hybrids, state extension versus anti-spin, like so. Also helpful, but not necessary, caps, where you combine together the extension and the anti-spin together in the same motion, right? But the one move that is absolutely essential is this, the 0 point. It probably looked like a stall to you, right? That's because it is a stall. For all intents and purposes, you could consider 0 points and stalls to be synonymous, right? When I'm performing an anti-spin flower and I add a stall at the very bottom, it looks different from all the other pedals because unlike the other pedals wherein the poi hangs on to some of its momentum and keeps traveling around, the 0 point / the stall is a point at which it completely loses momentum. If I try and shift planes out of one of these other pedals, hopefully you'll recognize that this is another example of plane bending. It's really freaking awkward, right? Whereas, if I try and shift my plane out of the 0 point, it looks far more natural. The reason for this is that there is angular momentum pulling the poi around in each of these flower petals. When, however, I go for a stall, the angular momentum absolutely, completely stops, right? Which means that there's no potential energy to pull the poi in its original plane. It could just as easily be in wheel plane. It could be in some weird-ass traverse diagonal plane next to me. Or it could go right back to its original plane, going the opposite direction, right? 0 points are great because they're points at which essentially the data of where the poi was moving is completely erased and we get to reset that data anew, right? And they're available to us at any of the pedal points just so long as we convert it into a stall, right? Like so. Like so. Yeah? So, how do we get our pedals to the point where they will work as 0 points? Here's a couple suggestions. Number one, whenever you head to one of your flower petals, this is kind of hokey, I know, but stick with me. Imagine there's like an invisible man over there who's ready to pull the poi head out of your reach. Now, watch very carefully again as I do that. If I go straight out like that, now, granted there's a bit of pantomime involved in that, but there's also a moment when the poi appears to be kind of hovering in midair. I've got basically a split second where the poi has no momentum behind it whatsoever before gravity kicks in and sends it back towards the floor. Which, as it turns out, is a perfect moment to switch it into a different plane. So, as you're going around to the 4 points of your flower, whether it be an in-spin or an anti-spin, imagine that you have that invisible man pulling on that poi head away from you. And what will tend to happen is your hand is going to follow the poi out straight along its last known path, right? Which will effectively kill all of its original angular momentum and make it possible to shift cleanly into a different plane, right? What you want to do is you want to practice this at all of the 4 compass points, yeah? So be able to stall top, be able to stall right, be able to stall down, and be able to stall left. Put this to the test. Put your 2 hands together and see if you can accomplish stalls with your flowers that you can easily reverse the direction, of your flowers out of. If you're at a point where you can reverse the direction of your flowers pretty cleanly, I'm going to say you're ready to do some nifty plane shifts, and here's why. I personally think that of the infinite number of points that intersects a 0 point, a flower going the opposite direction counts as one of them. In other words, if you can reverse the direction of a flower out of a stall that is a petal that's been converted into a 0 point, you're essentially plane shifting already. You're just plane shifting into the plane that's parallel with the original plane that you were in. It just happens to go the opposite direction, right? We can debate about that all we want, but for all intents and purposes, I would say that if you can pull off reversing your flower's direction out of a stall, you're ready for plane shifting. The easiest plane shift that you can try is the one that goes straight up and down, because no matter what, gravity will help you get there, and whichever plane you arrive in, it's one that you're already comfortable with, right? But the really cool looking one is the horizontal one, right? Horizontal's tough though. We're not used to moving in this plane, especially in ways that give us flowers and extensions, right? A couple quick tips. Number one, when you're moving in horizontal plane, keep your elbows slightly bent, such that even if you're not going warp speed as you're turning the poi around, it's got enough clearance that it's not going to hit your arm as it goes through, right? That's just a good idea in general, because it also gives you a little bit of give when you go for a horizontal stall. That will turn into another plane. That will turn into another plane shift, like so. Number two, when you're doing an anti-spin pedal in horizontal plane, you're actually, each time you're doing it, pulling the poi head towards your head for a split second, and then essentially pushing it back out to the sidelines. Yeah? Horizontal plane's tough. It takes a lot of practice. Totally worth it though. I recommend thinking about pulling it in and throwing it back out in 90-degree increments. It seems to be a good way to keep it even with the other flowers that you play with. What else did I have in my outline? I think actually that's it. So yeah, once you start playing around with that, try and see all the weird places that you can find these 0 points at, and where you can move the poi in and out of them. I think you'll be very surprised to see how many opportunities this affords you. So, yeah, now as to why this video exists. So last week, a gentleman that I'll confess I didn't know extremely well, but was very touched by nonetheless, Burning Dan, passed away. And his passing reminded me of a time when I met up with him and Alien John in Barcelona, completely on accident. And he told me a very, very curious kind of epigram, wherein he compared plane shifting to life. And he said that anytime we want to shift our direction in life, it's easiest to do so when we've completely stopped the momentum of the life that we had before. And it seemed really hokey to me at the time, but especially after his passing, it feels more and more relevant, and more comparable to the situations that we actually do face in life. So, when you're playing around with your stalls, and bear with me, I know this is going to be hokey, and you imagine that invisible guy yanking out on your poi to help you get your stalls down, make those 0 points work. Imagine it's Dan, grinning at you like a maniac, still trying to teach a boy from beyond the grave, yeah? And hopefully that's a tribute that the big guy would enjoy. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope this is of use to y'all, and see you soon. Peace.